Let's play some random Lichess puzzles. Okay, white is down a pawn. Our knight is pinned. Got rook takes rook. Black's back rank is well defended. Okay, so look for forcing moves like captures. So what happens if you capture the rook? Well, black recaptures, but then there are two loose pieces in the position. So can you see a move to fork those pieces? Yes, queen to a4 will fork the rook and the bishop. Don't want to play queen to a4 first because that rook is defended. Okay, so we take it, and now there's an undefended rook, so we can fork the pieces. And then we grab the bishop. Okay, 1567 rated puzzle. Let's try another one. All right, what did white take? He took a pawn. Okay, so white is now up a pawn. So let's see what's going on. The queen is defending the rook. We do have bishop to f5. So I was looking for moves to attack the queen once I noticed the queen was defending the rook. And so queen to f5 comes to mind immediately to attack the queen, but it also forks the rook. So what can white do after bishop to f5? Well, he has to save his queen. There's no way to protect the rook, so we're going to win the rook. Okay, we'll take that. Keep our bishop defended. Don't take with the queen. You want to keep that bishop defended there. All right, let's try another one. Okay, so the queen came back and attacked our rook on c7. Black looks like he's up a couple of pawns here. There's this weak square. Maybe we can get at that weak square for a checkmate. In fact, what happens after queen to e7? How does black defend the position? Can't take the rook. We've got a mate. So black has to defend the g7 square. One way to do it is rook to f7, but that drops the rook here on d8 with check, which also, by the way, guards our rook. So anything other than rook to f7 in this position? Well, what about queen to f6? What do we do after queen to f6? So queen e7, queen f6 seems to defend. Well, the bishop is under attack. So we can take the bishop with our rook, which will defend our queen. So if the queen takes our queen, we take it back. And if the rook takes our rook, we take the rook. Okay, so it looks like queen to e7 is going to force queen to f6, and then we win a bishop. So let's go for that. Okay, and we'll win the bishop, and he trades. Okay, so we're up a piece. So 1808 puzzle, let's try another one. Okay, queen to c2. Okay, so equal material. We have a battery here. We have an escape square covered. So I don't see any captures. I don't see any checks. I don't see any loose pieces. So we look for attacks. Can we attack some of his pieces? Sure. How about knight to b4, forking the queen and the rook? Okay, he's forced to move the queen since I don't see a good counterattack. And probably wants to stay in contact with the rook, so we'll move the queen back there, or there, or there, or there, and we take the rook, and white recaptures. So since material is equal now, we'll win the exchange, and we should have a good position. Okay, pretty easy. Let's try another one. All right, so we're black and we're down a pawn. These pawns look very dangerous. So what do we do here? We look for loose pieces. Both of these rooks are loose, but this one is in line with our rook. So we think about moving the pawn. Should we move it 1 square? No, let's move it 2 squares. So if we move it 2 squares, we call check. And then the king has to get out of check, maybe take the pawn or move back, and then we get a free rook. Well, we get a rook for the price of a pawn. And our 2 rooks should be sufficient to stop these 2 passed pawns, even with the aid of that rook. So let's go for that. Check, and then take the rook. Ooh, a 999 rated puzzle. Okay, let's try another one. All right, so queen to f3. What's going on here? We are up 1 pawn in the position. Our king doesn't look great here on f8. The rook is stuck in the corner. The bishop is under attack, but it's defended. This bishop is loose. The king is in the center. Should look for checks down the e-file. So we have this check, we have this check, and we have this check. That's the check I like. So queen to e5 check forks the bishop. So if the king steps aside to either f1 or d1, then we take the bishop. By the way, our bishop would end up being pinned here to our queen, but if the bishop gets attacked again, we always have the move g5 to defend it with a pawn. And it should be very solid there. So the only other way to get out of check here is to block. Blocking with the bishop is still going to drop the bishop to that pawn. Any other blocking moves, we take the bishop. So it looks good. Let's fork. Let's win the bishop. And the puzzle's over. Okay. All right, so we'll try another one here. Wow, this puzzle was played 223,400 times. A lot of traffic on this site. Okay, so we're up a knight here in this position. Our queen is under attack. The pawn behind it is vulnerable if we move out of the way. We have to watch out for rook takes e5. Probably a lot of moves win here since we're up a knight, but let's try to attack the king. We do have a rook on the h-file. We have the queen to attack, we have the knight to attack. Have to do something about the queen right now. So looking for forcing moves, I'm just wondering what happens after rook takes h3 check. So all the escape squares are guarded, so that forces g takes h3. Then we either have queen takes h3 check, or maybe better, get another piece into the attack. The other rook can come. No, we have a pawn here. We can't do that. So here, 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 king steps aside. Yeah, then the queen comes back to g3 with check. There are no pieces to block these checks, so the king goes back to h1, and then the other rook to h8 is mate. So we have 1, 2, 3, mate and 4 in this position. Let's try it. Check, 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 and mate. Okay, not too hard, very forcing. All right, let's try another one. Okay, so we're down a couple of pawns in the position. This rook is on my side of the board. Maybe I can attack it and win it. In fact, it is in line with my queen here. So if I move the pawn to c5, yeah, that's a nice double attack. I'm attacking the queen and I'm attacking the rook. So what can he do about that? Pawn to c5. Is there a counterattack? I don't see one. He can attack my queen, maybe with the knight, but we just grab the rook. So it looks like he has to move the queen. What if he moves it over here to guard the rook? Okay, then what do we do? So c5, queen g6. Can we decoy the queen so it's not protecting that rook? Like knight to h4, attacking the queen. Queen has to move. Can it stay in contact with that rook? Well, f5 is covered by the knight, and e4 is covered by the rook on e1, so I don't think so. So that looks like it's going to be at c5 attacking the queen and the rook simultaneously. The queen has to guard the rook, at least try, but then knight h4 will force the defender of the rook away and will take the rook. And we don't have any loose pieces, no counterattack is coming, so this should work. Oh, he moves here. Just gives up the rook. Strange. Okay, we'll take that. All right, at the last minute I did notice this fork, but it's well defended. So I'm curious, why did he play well, I guess it doesn't matter. You're going to lose the rook one move later anyway, but let's check out the engine. So queen f6, queen g6, not much difference. Queen f6 is slightly preferred. So after queen g6, yes, we were right about knight to h4. And now the queen can't stay in contact with the rook anymore. The engine is suggesting, though, counterattacking the white queen here. So I should have seen that move, actually. So I ended my analysis too early. But that allows me to take the queen and attack this rook at the same time. So if you take my queen, I can win the exchange here. And I'm still attacking this knight. Actually, I'm winning a rook, because if you take my knight, I take your knight. Well, you come forward and attack my rook. So we move the rook away somewhere. And he can take my knight. So yeah, I just win the exchange in that line. Pretty complicated for an 1172 rated puzzle, but it ended too early, I think. It didn't go down the critical line. So I learned something. Let's try another puzzle. Alright, so white just grabbed a pawn here on g4. So first instinct is, can I grab that knight? Okay, I gotta win more than a knight, though. I'm down 2 knights in this position. Wow, and I have tripled isolated pawns. But this king is awful. Okay, so if I take the knight, king has 2 squares, or 2 legal moves in that position, here or here. Doesn't want to go there because the rook swings over to the h file for mate. So if I take the knight, it goes back. Is there any follow-up to that? There's no further safe checks. The rooks are protecting each other. King looks safe on f1. So let's look for something better than taking the knight. It's a move similar to an earlier puzzle. The queen is loose and it's in line with my queen, and so forget about this knight. They're tempting me with that knight that just landed on that square. Just push this pawn and call check and open an attack on the queen. So the king will move away somewhere and we'll get a whole queen. So then we'll have a queen for 2 knights. And that king will still be badly placed. So let's go for that. Okay, and let's try just one more puzzle. Let's hope for a hard one. Okay, so here we're down an exchange as well. White is really weak on the light squares. I have this bishop, I have this queen. Can we engineer a mate here on g2? Okay, so most forcing move seems to be queen to f3. Queen to h3 also attacks that square, but queen to h3 seems to allow the pawn to push to f3 to block the bishop. So queen to f3 stops that pawn from pushing. So that's an immediate mate threat on g2. Is there any defense? Well, there's going to have to be something to block that. Nothing can guard g2. King can't go anywhere. Maybe moving the rook and getting an escape square. Yeah, if you move the rook over, it's going to do nothing. We still have the same mate here. King can't escape that. So the only thing white can try is to block something, like put the knight here or here, most likely here, guarded by the pawn. If you move it here, we're just going to take that with the bishop and renew our mate threat. Okay, so queen to f3, knight to d5. Now, what do we do about knight to d5? Well, we take it with our knight. We want to preserve our bishop that's participating in the mating attack. Okay, so we win a knight. Does white want to take back our knight? Well, if he does, then our bishop takes his pawn and renews the mate threat. And that time there's nothing to block and there's no way to stop it other than giving up the queen for the bishop. Okay. So again, after queen to f3, knight to d5, knight takes knight, white can't take with that pawn. We just have to win this knight. And we're threatening to move the knight away and renew our mate threat. So it looks very powerful. So what will white do after we take the knight? Well, the puzzle will probably end, but can white do anything? Well, white can maybe attack our queen while that bishop is temporarily blocked by our own knight. So maybe queen to d1 attacking our queen. At the very least, we can trade queens and move our knight to safety, and we have 2 pieces and a pawn for a rook, which is probably a winning material advantage. All right, so one more time, queen f3, knight d5, knight takes knight, queen d1. What do we have after that? Oh, I think we have a checkmate. Okay, this is a hard puzzle, if I'm right about this. So after the queen comes to d1 to attack our queen, what about queen to g2 check? Forcing the king to capture our queen, and then our knight moves to f4 for a double check. Check by the knight and check by the bishop. So for a double check, you can't block, you can't capture, you have to move your king. But the only square to move the king to is back to g1. It's the only safe square, and then knight to h3 is mate because the bishop has h1 and g2 covered. So I wonder if white's going to go for that line with queen to d1. Queen to d1 results in a mate. All right, very interesting, very interesting. Let's see what happens. Let's play it. Okay, so we threaten the mate. The knight blocks. We take with our knight. Okay, he does take our knight back. I'm going to look at that line with the engine in a minute. So I mentioned taking back here with the bishop is going to result in another mate threat that can only be stopped by white giving up his queen. Okay, so we're ahead a lot of material and we're going to win. So only 1499, even though there was a very tough mate to spot in one of the variations. So you can really analyze these puzzles very deeply sometimes, more so than the puzzle actually is, because sometimes the computer doesn't play the most critical lines or the toughest lines. So I'm going to go back and turn the engine on here. After this move, I was curious about the defense queen to d1. So the reason the computer doesn't do that, of course, is because it's a mate. So queen to d1. Yeah, so my mate was correct. It says play queen to g2 check. King takes queen. Double check here with the bishop and the knight. And the knight has that square covered. The bishop has these squares covered. So the king has to move back to g1, and then there's a mate. Okay, so we found a nice interesting tactic there. All right, well, thanks for watching the video.